Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking the Shadowlands pre-patch, which is now live in all regions, and specifically we are talking the new pre-patch cinematic that WoW had initially data mined and that Blizz have now posted properly on their official World of Warcraft YouTube channel, making it official, but they marked it as a spoiler. This is a spoiler! The cinematic isn't live in game yet. Most of us speculate that it's due to play when you accept the breadcrumb quest in your faction capital that begins the narrative part of the pre-patch experience. That's probably going to be 2 weeks or so before Shadowlands actually launches, and obviously at the time of writing we have no idea when that's actually going to be. So technically, yeah, this entire cinematic is a spoiler, but if you're worried about that sort of thing, I'd like to make it clear it's not really a spoiler. It plays before any of the narrative actually starts, so it's like watching the very first scene of a movie or reading the first paragraph of a book. Although we're looking at it early, it's not spoiling anything that comes before because nothing comes before. That said, you might want to see it for the first time in-game, in situ, and that's completely fair enough, in which case this video isn't for you, because today we are performing one of our deep dive cinematic analysis on this film, which brings the events leading into Shadowlands hurtling to the forefront. It's not a long cinematic, but it's especially nicely done in my opinion, and it's got some great details and references in it that I'd really like to talk about and highlight for you as well, and just generally geek out to. So usual disclaimer, this is not a reaction video. I've already watched this animation plenty enough times, and if you haven't seen it yet, then honestly, this video is a terrible way to do so, because we're going to be stopping and starting and skipping bits and talking all over it, because that's just how we do things round here, okay? So join us as we look at the Shadowlands pre-patch cinematic and ask, why were the taken? What is the Jailer's plan for them? How does Bolvar get in the way? And what does all of this mean for Sylvanas in the new expansion? Okay, go. We open with this incredibly fitting shot of the shattered sky above Icecrown, which is incredibly significant. Obviously, it's one of the main promotional images of the entire expansion. We see it absolutely everywhere online, on the Collector's Edition, and of course now, the login screen, which we look at literally every time we play this video game. So having this as our screen-filling opening image really is a way of saying, yes, Shadowlands has begun now, compadres, here we effing go, boys. Forwards to that effect. But it's also worth mentioning timelines briefly here too. The events of this cinematic take place shortly after the action from the official Shadowlands cinematic trailer that we saw at BlizzCon 2019, where Sylvanas soloed Bolvar 1v1, looted him, then disenchanted the gear, causing this big tangerine rift in reality in the first place. And that cinematic ended with loads of shots of the camera traveling upwards to take in the devastation of the rift, and this pre-patch cinematic begins with the camera panning back down from the rift again, back into Azeroth, signifying a continuation from that trailer in terms of narrative, and also establishing our reality and Azeroth as being where this next part of the story will be told, played out under the metaphorical shadow of what the Banshee Queen just did. It's probably actually the same day. The fight between Bolvar and Sylvanas happens as the first light of dawn starts to break, and it looks like it might be daytime now, but it's always hard to tell with Icecrown though, isn't it, because it's so dark and edgy. The music playing over this opening action is dark and ominous, but a lot calmer than the awesome punch in the face that ended the cinematic trailer too. The "oh shit, what's she done? Oh bollocks, she ripped a hole in the sky" song, as I like to call it, to further concrete that this is the aftermath of those events. The dust has settled and we have some room to breathe and come to some sort of reckoning over what just happened. And against that Azerothian sky, we see two distant riders making their way from Icecrown to the just now arriving Arcarus, the Ebonhold, home of the Knights of the Ebon Blade, a place Death Knight players will be incredibly familiar with, as it was your order hall in Legion. And as we get this shot of the interior doors opening to reveal the Death Knights carrying Bolvar into safety after taking a complete whooping from Sylvanas, this is the kind of shot that I live for in cinematics like this. Because, okay, animations like the Afterlives shorts, which are all hand-painted, do have a much wider artistic scope than a cinematic like this, which uses pre-rendered in-game assets. But what I love to see with these shorts is how they are using the assets that they have. As a player who's familiar and slightly knowledgeable about the world, it's really exciting to me to see how they recreate the things that I know in this glorious, more high-definition version. So first of all, the interior of the Ebonhold behind our characters here is the main hall of the necropolis. This is the big chandelier thing which hangs in the center, and the way it's positioned suggests that we are on the upper floor here, which means that one of these doors inside the Ebonhold, we are just discovering now, leads to a special hidden toilet chill-out room specifically for Bolvar. Bolvar's got his own toilet in the Ebonhold, and that's where they're taking him. That's awesome. And these obviously aren't any old Death Knights hauling him into the toilet either. This is Nazgrim and Sally Whitemane, two of the current Four Horsemen. Quick history lesson. The Four Horsemen were originally raised as basically uber badass bodyguards to Kel'Thuzad and were a boss fight in both versions of Naxxramas, although the later Wrath of the Lich King version had a lineup change, with Baron Rivendare replacing Vanilla's Alexandros Mograine, the original Ashbringer, who became a Death Knight after his oldest son, Reno, betrayed him and murdered him with his own sword, the Ashbringer, and then had to be replaced as one of the Four Horsemen between Vanilla and Wrath, because in the comics, in the interim, his other son, Darian Mograine, killed him again with his own sword, the Ashbringer, again, which then held Alexandros' soul in it, which was redeemed by Darian plunging the blade into his own heart, killing himself and becoming a Death Knight in the process. Why am I telling you this? Well, because it's funny, but also because if you are a Death Knight player, then you know that Darian is now leader of the new Four Horsemen, which Bolvar told us to put together to fight the Legion. Oh, and slight spoiler, but you may want to remember that stuff I just told you about Alexandros too, if you're planning on playing Shadowlands, just in case. Nazgrim was the first of the new Horsemen raised in that campaign, him being dead in the first place after we defeated him in a boss fight at the Siege of Orgrimmar. And Sally Whitemane is of course the final boss of the Scarlet Cathedral dungeon, originally with her buddy Reno Mograine, the son who killed Alexandros the first time, and then from Miss of Pandaria onwards with some other guy called Durand, who is definitely not Reno, even though he literally uses some of the exact same voice files in the fight. I dare say we'll see a bit of Nazgrim and Whitemane throughout the course of Shadowlands, so it's really great to see them appear here. And a little shout out to the artists and animators in this bit as well. Obviously, all of these models are existing in-game assets that have been beefed up to look cinematic and awesome, and Nazgrim's cloak here is a great example. In the game, it's 2D and flat like most cloaks, but in this cinematic, it's the same cloak, but those chains have been lifted out and individually animated, and that's just really cool. Anyway, Bolvar is obviously still really hurt after getting his hat stolen, and you can tell by how he staggers in and is breathing very heavily, which reminds you that although the Lich King has a very unique link to death and the Shadowlands, he is not actually dead or undead himself. But he is still kind of on fire after being bestowed Burnie power by the Red Dragonflight to survive the Blight at the Wrathgate, and the next bit of speech is super interesting.
I knew she would come one day to seize this power for herself. Instead, she has done the unthinkable.
He always expected Sylvanas to come back and try and steal the Helm of Domination from him, but he always thought it was because she wanted its power, something backed up by the line he says to her in the cinematic trailer.
That power will be your prison.
He, just like me, thought she was going to put that helm on But she had us both fooled, because her plan, we now know, was to destroy it and open the way to the Shadowlands. And I just said how much I enjoy seeing things I know recreated in these cinematics. Well, how about recreating another cinematic? The shot of Sylvanas tearing apart the Helm of Domination, recreated from that high-fidelity cinematic trailer and downscaled for easier streaming. And the reason this is so interesting is because there's a couple of really illuminating lines in the art book of the Shadowlands Collector's Edition, which came out this week, a copy of which I just so happen to have here. The Helm of Domination was crafted to be our way forward. Instead, the one seared by the flames of life uses it to keep us at bay. Now, the quote is uncredited, but clearly comes from, well, probably the jailer himself, but certainly at least one of his followers, and refers to how Bolvar, seared by the flames of life, has been a roadblock to the grand plan of, it would seem, heralding the forces of the Maw into Azeroth. And that is fascinating because of what it means. It means that the jailer and his buddies, and possibly kin, the Dreadlords, see my video from May or Belial's recent reboot of it for details on that, allowed the Helm to be used by Kil'jaeden and the Legion with the much bigger endgame of taking over Azeroth themselves. Or maybe they just wanted the world soul of Azeroth dead and were happy to let the Burning Legion do it, but are now taking matters into their own hands. Death comes for the soul of your world, the jailer says to us after all. The Legion using the Helm, Ner'zhul, the creation of the Lich King, Arthas, they were all part of a bigger plan. But then Bolvar came along and ruined that plan, put on the Helm, and apparently has been dedicating his energies to keeping the spiky forces of the Maw at bay ever since. And that explains why Sylvanas says in the cinematic trailer,
"You are unfit to wear this crown."
See, I always thought she was saying that Bolvar wasn't badass enough to wear the helm, but what she meant was he was never supposed to wear it. He wasn't part of the plan. He's been working against the plan since he put the helm on, and she's here to put everything back on track. A conclusion backed up by another quote in the art book, which says, under a picture of a dark, Maw-sworn Kyrian, "We would send those Valkyr to serve as her tethers to mortality. A pact needed to be made. Only then could she return beyond the veil. Only then will the Banshee Queen claim the crown of the false king." And this, of course, refers to Sylvanas' first encounter with the jailer, which we now know was in the short story Edge of Night, when she threw herself from the top of Icecrown Citadel. We now know that's when she made a deal with the jailer, and the plan was always to depose the false king, Bolvar, which is awesome. I mean, it's just really exciting, you know, to have so much explained. I know some people will call it a retcon, but it doesn't actually retroactively change anything, just gives us more information to make the stuff we did know mean something different to what we thought, which isn't quite the same thing. So if that is the grand plan, finally get rid of the massive cockblock Bolvar and open up the way between Azeroth and the Shadowlands, if that was the plan all along, why? What does the jailer want to achieve? Well, maybe he just wants to totally take over a new reality because he's so bad, and that is totally possible, but I think it'll all turn out to be about the world soul of Azeroth. Death comes for the soul of your world, he says. I think he's probably wants to create a super badass, powerful Death Titan out of Azeroth, just like the Void Lords want to create a Void Titan by corrupting Azeroth. And when the intergalactic transdimensional disco war kicks off in an expansion or two, then I wouldn't be surprised if we learn that the Light quite fancy making a Light Titan out of Azeroth too, something like that. And that the world soul of our planet is seen by many of the different cosmological forces as being key to their ultimate victory and domination over the others. That is some pretty wild speculation, I know, but you can see why I was so keen to make this video now though, right? Should we get back to the cinematic, because it now turns into something almost more like a trailer for Shadowlands, as it shows the events that eventually take us to the Maw at the launch of the expansion.
Now, she will come for them all.
Now she will come for them all. And there's some really neat syncing of the things we see on screen alongside Bolvar's voiceover narration here, as we see the various racial leaders in their hometowns, each becoming aware that something bad is about to happen and that some shit is about to go down, each sharing the screen with a character who we will later talk to in-game to find out exactly what happened to them, which is a nice touch. So to start, we see this really cool shot of Nordrassil, which is where Tyrande said she was taking the Night Elf in the Alliance BFA epilogue when she got into an angry strop with Anduin for making peace with the new Horde Council.
To finish what she started.
And so we also see Chandris Feathermoon, who will recount these exact events to us later in-game. And we see those unnatural clouds rolling in. And this is a really nice bit of filmmaking, because the way through for the forces of the Maw was ripped open above Icecrown, but now they are here, and we've gone from a hole in the sky to the Jailer's army filling and darkening the sky. Bolvar's line saying that Sylvanas will finish what she started. Which makes you think, you know, the last world tree we saw Tyrande in, Sylvanas kind of totally burned down. So the idea of the Night Elves being in a different world tree now, and Sylvanas coming back to finish what she started, should be a pretty terrifying prospect for anyone with pointy ears. I love this shot of Tyrande though. It really draws the attention to the harsh cracking of the skin under her eyes as the strength of the Night Warrior takes an ever firmer hold over her. Another thing we might be exploring more in the new expansion.
And break all who opposed her.
We see Jaina and Talia, and yes, you know I was hoping to see Talia in this cinematic, so you know that I am absolutely thrilled that she has in fact made it. Talia, as well as being one of my favourite characters from BFA, being Bolvar's daughter, which, I don't know, could prove to be important at some point, I suppose. And Baine Bloodhoof back in Thunderbluff with Mela High Mountain, the High Mountain Tauren leader, who is just always hanging around Baine. Have you noticed? Like, don't forget, she totally noped out of the second Siege of Orgrimmar to go and tend Baine's wounds. Really? And Bolvar's voice line here is that Sylvanas will break all that oppose her, which again is a very fitting line to have over an image of Baine, because he really did oppose her in BFA, to the extent that she had him arrested and tortured him, and he eventually had to be rescued by me. And as those clouds roll in over Mulgore here, they almost look like fingers on a hand, reaching out to grab or crush their victims below.
Those who held Azeroth together will be in her sights.
The line, "those who held Azeroth together," is said over Thrall and his wife Agra in Orgrimmar, which is good because it means that Thrall didn't kill and eat Agra, which, okay, I never thought he had, but the fact that she was nowhere to be seen in BFA wasn't doing anything to convince me that he hadn't, put it that way. And just before we cut away from Thrall, we see in his facial expressions that he's just spotted something in the clouds and is just preparing himself for a fight. Before we head to the climax, Stormwind and the War Memorial, where Anduin and Greymane have gathered to have a big old cry about Anduins Dad. I mean, seriously, someone get this boy a hobby. And yes, the symbolism here is obvious. In this cinematic for the pre-patch of Shadowlands, an expansion set in the afterlife, this action is about to go down in a literal monument to death. It's our view of death. Peaceful, respectful, quiet and thoughtful, but we are about to see that reality is a lot spikier and nastier and scarier as the actual inhabitants of the afterlife gatecrash our idealized idea of it. So it's setting up that contrast there. But before that, we see death is still a very important part of Anduin's life. He still mourns his father, who, by the way, died in the Legion pre-patch. So with it being Shadowlands pre-patch now, I guess it's kind of like the anniversary of Varian's death in Warcraft Warcraft land. That's probably why Anduin's here, and why he dressed his horse in full ceremonial battle gear for a 3-minute ride across Stormwind. It would also then be the anniversary of Sylvanas becoming war chief and setting all these recent events in motion. The Memorial also, fittingly, is where you could argue that BFA began for Alliance players. It's where Anduin first came into contact with Azeroth in the Legion epilogue cinematics. But look, the main takeaway is he's still very sad about death and how final death is. Ho ho. We get that cool narrative device of an animal sensing that there's something wrong before any of the humans do and getting all frisky, and then the human who is sometimes an animal realizing before the human who's just a human and looking up at the sky and... okay. You know I like to find references and clues in the way these cinematics are presented, but I'm warning you now, even I think that I've gone too far here. But honestly, I can't help it, because look at those clouds. Do you see anything in those clouds? Because I swear they are made to suggest Banshee Sylvanas from the BFA cinematic trailer. And I know you totally agree with me right now. Not that they look like Sylvanas, but that yes, this time I have totally gone too far. And I know there are probably very talented artists and animators who made this scene, watching this video right now and laughing their asses off and saying out loud, "No, Taliesin, you dickhead, it's just a scary dark cloud." But look, all I'm saying is, if Terran Gregory comes up to me at BlizzCon one year and says, "Yeah, we totally did make the cloud to look like Banshee Sylvanas, nice one," it wouldn't surprise me, that's all. Okay, I get this is me going too far and I'm being too keen to spot things now, but I can't help it, that's what I see. So I told you. Now we know. That cinematic was the first time that we really got a glimpse of Sylvanas' Covenant ability after all, and it makes sense that this cinematic might subtly call back to it now, like really, really subtly. Because as the shadow casts over Anduin, he looks up to see the unnatural, anima-coloured lightning crack behind the storm as the Morsworn Kyrian swoop into view, and just to really let us know that shit is going down, the stupid trailer music is playing again. Oh shit, they're coming from the sky. Oh heck, you better run away. Anduin barely has time to draw his sword before the Morsworn totally reveal that they are in the same covenant as Sylvanas by using the same covenant ability that she used against Bolvar, the purple smoky chains, flying out, enveloping the king and yoiking him the yeet out of there, all before Gen Greymane has done anything like draw a weapon or change into a badass wolf or actually anything at all. You are not a good bodyguard, Gen. You are a very bad boy. And I love the jerky movements and momentum with which Anduin is hoisted up here, swinging like a ragdoll as he's carried away. And yeah, he might be useless, but you've got a feel for Gen Greymane here. He is at the memorial to his dear friend Varian, who, you know, died at the Broken Shore with Gen. His "no" is very reminiscent of his tortured cry in that cinematic. And now he's just failed to stop his friend's son being yoinked off from the memorial to his dead friend by Sylvanas, who, by the way, killed his own son. Blizz kind of laying it on Gen thick here, and I understand why this old man is yelling at a cloud, is what I'm saying. And as Gen cries out, "Sylvanas!" in complete helpless desperation into an empty sky, and the candle symbolically blows out, because from now on there is no need to memorialize death. Death is coming for you. Him standing in the grounds of that memorial remind us of the dead Varian, but also of just how many people died in the battle at the Broken Shore, their names taking up multiple gigantic stone tablets of this memorial, and all of whom, by the way, are now in the Shadowlands. I wonder if we might see that ready-made army being utilized at any point in the expansion. And then we finish with, I think, the most badass looking image of Bolvar's face that Blizzard have given us so far.
And when she comes, our end begins.
He just looks totally baller and mean here, with the little curl at the top of his lip. And when she comes, our end begins, he says, and well, she's come, so here we are. I wonder who he means by we. Is it all of us? Does the end begin now for all of us, as in we will all die? Maybe he's talking about our entire plane of existence. Maybe this will all end with there being a different relationship between the living reality, the Shadowlands, and other cosmic realms. Maybe he means we, as in the Death Knights of the Ebon Blade. It's still Sally and Nazgrim that he's talking to here after all. Maybe whatever happens in Shadowlands will somehow mean the end of undeath on Azeroth. Or maybe he just means the end of this cinematic, and if that is what he means, then he's absolutely right, because that's the end of the cinematic. And up close, like this, it's funny to notice how Bolvar is kind of like the anti-jailer in terms of how he looks. His dark, charred skin riddled with glowing red, almost runic scars, in contrast to the jailer's pale grey skin riddled with glowing blue anima runes. So the thing I really like about this cinematic, I love seeing Bolvar chilling with his Ebon Blade buddies. I love all the different Azeroth characters and locations that it takes in. I love the heavy symbolism of Anduin being at his father's grave and the mercilessness of the Moorsworn. And I love how it being told mostly in voiceover gives it as much a trailer feel as an in-game cinematic feel. Something which I think works well for a pre-patch cinematic, which is all about setting things up and building hype. The question remains, of course, why was it Tyrande, Jaina, Baine, Thrall, and Anduin chosen to be kidnapped? And what is the jailer and Sylvanas' plan for them? They are, of course, all important faction leaders, but as Bolvar says, they are, in particular, the group that held Azeroth together through the last war. They are, if you like, the peacemakers, the ones who crossed faction boundaries and teamed up to defeat Sylvanas and then N'Zoth. All except Tyrande, of course, who's got her own thing going on, and who, little spoiler, we later find out isn't captured like the others because she's just too badass and beat up the Moorsworn that tried to take her. So could this be just spiteful revenge on Sylvanas' part, targeting those she feels the most personal recent grudges against? Or are these victims the choice of the jailer? And why? We get some more insights in the opening day questing in the Moor, but not much. So I'd love to know what the purpose of these elaborate abductions were. Perhaps just to spread terror and show strength, or maybe to lead us and Bolvar into the Shadowlands, a plan which absolutely totally works if that were true. Spoiler, but most of the Shadowlands expansion is indeed set in the Shadowlands. But it has certainly whet my appetite even more for an expansion that has got me chomping at the bit already right now. But what do you think? If you knew the Abduction cinematic was coming, like many of us did, does this meet your expectations? Is it a fitting lead-in to the new expansion? What's the jailer's plan for the peacemakers? And another thing, what exactly is Sylvanas' job title with the jailer, do you think? Like, is she a partner or an employee or a peon or what? What's going on there? Let us know in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today. If you like this video, don't thank us. Thank our patrons who give their actual real life money to make all of our work happen. And guys, thank you so much. Genuinely, because without you, there would be a whole lot less Taliesin and Evitel. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Eloa Wendy. No, my name is Taliesin from me and Evitel, and Nyrin too. Until next time, cheerio.